The morning my son-in-law shoved me against the kitchen wall and told me I was a foolish old man who deserved to lose everything. That was the morning I stopped trying to save my daughter's marriage and started saving myself. But let me take you back to where this really began. My name is Graham, and I am 67 years old. I spent 31 years working as a civil engineer for the Wellington City Council. I designed drainage systems, oversaw road projects, reviewed infrastructure plans. My whole career was built on precision, on making sure the numbers added up, on catching the flaw before it became a catastrophe. The irony of what happened to my family is not lost on me. The man who spent his career preventing structural collapse completely missed the rot happening inside his own home. My wife, Patricia, passed away from ovarian cancer 11 years ago. She was 52. After she died, I threw myself into work for another 4 years, then took early retirement at 63. I downsized from our family home in Karori to a smaller place in Johnsonville, 3 bedrooms. A decent garden, no mortgage. I had my Kiwi Saver, my council pension, a term deposit I'd been building for 20 years, and the equity from the house sale. I was not wealthy by any dramatic measure, but I was comfortable, secure. I had worked every decade of my adult life for that security. My daughter Claire was 34 when all of this started. She is my only child. After Patricia died, Claire and I grew closer in the way that people do when grief strips everything else away. She would come to Johnsonville for Sunday roasts. We would walk the tracks up at Tawa. She had a good job as a practice manager at a medical center in Newtown, owned a tidy unit in Kilbirnie that she had bought at 29. I had helped her with the deposit, about $40,000, money I gave freely and happily because that is what fathers do. She was sensible with money, practical. She had her mother's grounded quality about her. Then she met Damon. She introduced him to me about 3 years ago at a cafe in Teatro. He was 41, well-dressed, confident in the way that fills a room before you have decided whether you actually like the person. He told me he ran a digital investment consultancy, helping small businesses grow their online revenue streams, he said. He used a lot of words that sounded specific, but meant nothing the more you turned them over. I asked him which companies he had worked with. He gave me 2 names I could not verify, and moved the conversation along quickly. I filed that away, but said nothing. Claire looked happy. I told myself I was being a protective father, the suspicious type that daughters warn their partners about. Over the following months, I watched Damon carefully. He had a quality I can only describe as deliberate warmth, the kind that feels generous but is always slightly calculated. He remembered small details. He complimented me on things I mentioned only once. He asked about my engineering career with what seemed like genuine interest. But whenever I turned questions back on him about his own family, his background, where he grew up, the answers were vague, quickly redirected. He had grown up in Christchurch, or was it Dunedin? His parents were both gone. He had a brother he was estranged from. He had studied at a university in Australia, but left early to go into business. Claire and Damon moved in together after 8 months. They got engaged after 14. I attended the engagement dinner and smiled throughout and said nothing about the hollow feeling that had settled in my chest. They married 18 months after they met, at a small ceremony in the Marlborough Sounds. It was a beautiful day. Claire wore Patricia's pearl earrings. I walked her down an outdoor aisle lined with pohutukawa branches, and I thought about her mother, and I kept it together until I sat down. For a while, things seemed fine. Claire still called regularly. She and Damon came to Johnsonville for Christmas. But I noticed, gradually, that the dynamic between us had shifted. Claire began deferring to Damon on things she would previously have decided herself. When I suggested the 3 of us go up to Taranaki for a long weekend, something Claire and I used to do annually, she said she would have to check with Damon first. She had never used that phrase before in her life. Then, about 2 years into the marriage, Claire told me she and Damon had decided to sell her Kilbirnie unit. She sat across from me at my kitchen table and explained it carefully. The way you explain something to someone you expect will not immediately understand. Damon had identified a significant opportunity. The digital market was shifting. He needed capital, seed capital. He called it to bring several clients into a new investment platform he had built. The returns, she said, would set them up for the next decade. The Kilbirnie unit had good equity. The market was favorable. It made sense to liquidate it now rather than sit on an asset that was not working hard enough. I asked how much the unit would sell for. She said the valuation had come in at $580,000. After costs, they would clear somewhere around $540,000. I put my cup down. I said, "Claire, I want to understand this clearly. You are selling your home, the home you own outright, the home with no mortgage, the home you worked 10 years to pay off to give the money to Damon for his business?" She said it was an investment, a joint decision. She said I was being old-fashioned. She said Damon understood the digital economy in a way that people from my generation found difficult to grasp. I did not argue with her that day. I had learned from Patricia that some conversations need to be planted rather than won. I told Claire I loved her, and that I trusted her judgment, and that I simply wanted to make sure she had thought it through. She hugged me at the door and said she had. The unit sold 6 weeks later. $538,000. Every cent of it transferred to a business account that Damon controlled. 3 weeks after that, Claire called me on a Tuesday evening. Her voice had a careful quality, composed, but barely. She told me that the investment platform had encountered some complications. Damon was working through them. In the meantime, they had been staying with a friend in Petonnet, but that arrangement was ending. She asked if they could stay with me in Johnsonville for a short while. "Just a few weeks," she said, "until things settled." I told her I needed a day to think. That night I sat in my kitchen, the same table where she had explained the plan to me, and I felt something I had not felt since Patricia's illness. A specific helplessness, the kind where you can see exactly what is happening and cannot find a handhold anywhere on the surface of it. I told them yes. They moved in on a Friday. The first week was manageable. Damon was courteous, helpful around the house, offered to cook twice. Claire seemed relieved to be somewhere stable. But by the second week, I began noticing things. Damon spent most of his days on phone calls in the spare room with the door closed. He took 3 separate calls that I inadvertently overheard fragments of references to accounts, transfers, a third party in Singapore. When I asked Claire casually how the platform complications were progressing, she said Damon had it handled and changed the subject. Then I noticed. One evening when Damon had left his laptop open on the dining table, a partial email thread visible on the screen. I did not read it deliberately. It was simply there, in my line of sight. What I saw was a name, a bank name, and a dollar figure with too many digits to belong to a platform that was supposedly struggling. I closed the laptop. I went to my room. I sat on the edge of my bed, and I thought about my daughter's face when she told me the investment would set them up for a decade. The certainty in her voice, the mildness of her eyes. The next morning I rang an old colleague, a man named Bernard, who had moved into property law after retirement, and whose judgment I trusted without reservation. I told him I needed a referral, not property, something else. Financial fraud, possibly. He did not ask unnecessary questions. He gave me the name of a firm in the CBD, a lawyer called Margaret Olson. I made the appointment for that Thursday. Margaret was 60, precise, and listened without expression for 20 minutes while I laid out everything I knew. When I finished, she asked 2 questions. First, was my name on any documents relating to the sale of the Kilbirnie unit? No. Second, had I signed anything since Damon and Claire moved into my home? No. She said, "Good." Then she said, "Mr. Graham, what you've described fits a pattern I've seen twice before. I want you to say nothing, sign nothing, and change nothing in your home or your accounts while I look into this properly. She assigned a private investigator, a methodical man named Phil, who had previously worked for the Serious Fraud Office, to look into Damon's business history. What Phil found over the following 3 weeks was thorough and damning. There was no registered company. The digital investment consultancy did not exist as a legal entity in New Zealand, Australia, or anywhere Phil could locate. The 2 client names Damon had mentioned to me at that cafe were shell names. One matched a dissolved company from 2019, the other had no registration record at all. Damon's real surname was not the one on his marriage certificate. His actual name was Damien Forsyth. He had a previous fraud conviction in Queensland. From 2014, he had served 16 months of a 3-year sentence for obtaining financial advantage by deception. He had been in a de facto relationship with a woman in Tauranga between 2016 and 2019, during which time she had sold a rental property and given him the proceeds. She had tried to pursue civil action and settled for a fraction of the amount. There was another woman in Palmerston North, a similar story, between 2020 and 2021. Claire was not the first. She was at least the fourth. The $538,000 from the Kilbirnie unit had moved through 2 accounts in 4 days and was now distributed across 3 different offshore structures. It was not gone in the sense of vanished. It was hidden in the sense of deliberately obscured. Margaret told me that with the right legal mechanisms, it was potentially recoverable. But it would take time, coordination with overseas financial authorities, and a criminal proceeding against Damon. I sat in Margaret's office on a Thursday afternoon in autumn and looked at the documents spread across her desk and felt something shift in me, not grief exactly, but a finality, the kind that arrives when you stop hoping you are wrong. What I had not anticipated was what happened next. Margaret called me on a Monday morning, 10 days later. Her voice had a controlled urgency I had not heard from her before. She told me that she had received a letter from a solicitor acting on behalf of Claire and Damon. The letter alleged that I had been displaying signs of cognitive decline, confusion, erratic behavior, an inability to manage my financial affairs independently. It requested that the court appoint Claire as my legal guardian, with authority over my personal finances, my property, and my healthcare decisions. I sat down slowly in my kitchen chair. Margaret said, "This is a strategic move. If they can establish guardianship, they can access your assets to cover their legal exposure. Don't panic. It's aggressive, but it's not unusual in cases like this. We were already prepared for something like this." She had, on my instruction 3 weeks earlier, arranged for my GP Dr. Eileen Wakefield, who had known me for 14 years, to conduct a formal cognitive assessment. The report, signed and dated, was already in Margaret's file. My results were in the top percentile for a man of my age. No impairment. No indicators of any kind. When I returned home that evening, Claire was in the kitchen. Damon was on the couch watching something on his phone. I made tea and said nothing about the guardianship application. I had learned from Margaret to keep my face steady and my information close, but Damon seemed to sense something. He watched me across the room that evening in a way he had not done before. Less charm, more calculation. The performance had thinned. The next morning I told them both at breakfast that I had spoken to my lawyer about updating my will and that I had decided to transfer the house into a trust for administrative simplicity. I watched Damon's face. There was the briefest contraction, not quite anger, but the look of a man whose timeline has been disrupted. That afternoon I left the house for what I said was an errand. When I came back, earlier than expected, Damon was in my study. He had not heard me come in. He was at my filing cabinet. The bottom drawer was open. He had my term deposit statements in his hand. I said his name quietly from the doorway. He turned slowly. For a moment, the competent, rehearsed version of him fell completely away. What was underneath was something colder. He said, "You're making this harder than it needs to be." I said, "Put those back and get out of my study." He said I had no idea what I was dealing with, that I was an old man who did not understand how the world worked anymore, that I should let Claire handle things the way she was capable of doing. I told him again to put the documents back. He took a step toward me and shoved me both hands on my chest back against the doorframe. I am 67 years old, and I went down onto one knee. He looked at me on the floor and straightened his jacket and walked out of the study. I sat on the floor for a moment. My shoulder ached where it had hit the frame. I breathed slowly, the way Patricia had taught me to breathe when I was angry. In through the nose, out through the mouth, count to 8. Then I got up, went to my room, closed the door, and called Margaret. She told me to call the police first. 2 constables arrived within the hour. I gave a statement. I showed them the bruising already forming on my shoulder. They spoke to Damon, who denied anything physical had occurred. They spoke to Claire, who was not home at the time. An incident report was filed. That evening, Claire came home and found me sitting in the lounge with the report in my hand. I told her what had happened. I told her calmly, without raising my voice, without exaggeration. I described what Damon had done. I described the documents in his hand. I told her I loved her and that I was frightened for her and that the man she had married had done this before to other women, and that I could show her the evidence if she was willing to see it. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Damon told me you fell. He said you tripped." I looked at my daughter's face, the face I had watched come into the world, the face I had seen grieve her mother, the face I had walked down an aisle in the Marlborough Sounds, and I understood that she was not able to hear me. Not yet. The belief she had placed in Damon was not just trust in him. It was the architecture of the last 3 years of her life. Dismantling it would mean dismantling herself. I told her, "I'm not going to argue with you about what happened in that room, but I need you to know that I have already done what I needed to do to protect myself. And this house and my finances are no longer accessible to anyone except me." She left the room. That night, she and Damon took their things and moved out. She did not say goodbye. Margaret filed the response to the guardianship application the following week. The cognitive assessment from Dr. Wakefield was submitted. Phil's full investigation report was submitted. The Queensland conviction record was submitted. The financial trail from the Kilbirnie sale through the 2 accounts to the offshore structures was submitted to both the court and the New Zealand Police Financial Crime Group. The guardianship application was declined within 6 weeks. The presiding judge's written decision noted that the applicant had failed to provide any credible evidence of cognitive impairment and that the application appeared to have been filed for purposes unrelated to genuine welfare concerns. Damon was arrested 4 months later. He was charged with obtaining by deception, fraud, and 2 counts related to identity documentation. The Queensland authorities were also notified. Asset recovery proceedings were initiated on the offshore accounts, a slow and painstaking process, but a real one. Claire did not contact me for 11 months. When she did, it was a text message. 7 words. "Dad, I'm so sorry. Can we talk?" I did not reply immediately. I sat with it for 3 days. Then I called her. She came to Johnsonville on a Sunday afternoon. She had lost weight. The worry lines around her eyes were deep in a way I had not seen before. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where she had explained the investment plan to me with such careful certainty, and she told me everything she had not been able to tell me before. She had known, somewhere behind her eyes, that things were not right, earlier than she admitted. But Damon had a way of explaining her doubts back to her as anxiety, as inherited conservatism from a father who was stuck in old thinking. He had reframed every red flag as her own limitation. By the time she understood what was happening, she was in so deep that acknowledging it meant acknowledging that she had handed over her home, her savings, and 3 years of her life to a man who had never seen her as anything other than an asset to be liquidated. I listened to everything she said. I did not offer reassurance before she had finished speaking. I did not rush to make it easier. When she was done, I told her the truth, that I was angry, and that I was also relieved she was sitting in front of me, and that both of those things were true at the same time, and I was not going to pretend otherwise. We did not fix everything that afternoon. We did not fix everything in the months that followed, but we began. That is something. After what we had been through, beginning again was not a small thing. The asset recovery process returned. A portion of the Kilbirnie proceeds $218,000 after legal costs and international process fees. It was not $538,000. It was not justice in the complete sense of the word, but it was something tangible for Claire to rebuild with. Damian Forsyth was sentenced to 4 years and 3 months. He will be eligible for parole in less than 3. I do not find that number satisfying, but I have stopped measuring my peace by his sentence. I want to say a few things directly, because this story is not only mine. If you are an older person and even someone you love begins talking about managing your finances on your behalf, slow down. There is no urgency that cannot wait for a second opinion. See your own lawyer, not theirs. Conduct a cognitive assessment with your own doctor before anyone else raises the question for you. A trust structure for your assets, set up with a solicitor you have chosen yourself, is not pessimistic. It is precisely the kind of preparation that protects the people you love from having to fight over your affairs when you are no longer able to. If you are watching your adult child be changed by a new partner changed in the way I am describing, where they begin deferring, where your questions get redirected, where they start using words that do not sound like them, trust that feeling. You are not being a difficult parent. You are reading something real. The most dangerous manipulation does not look like control. It looks like a plan. It looks like an opportunity. It sounds confident and specific and full of the language of modern success. And if you are a woman or a man, in the position my daughter was in deep inside, something that started with love and ended somewhere you cannot quite name, I want you to know that the shame you feel is not yours to carry alone. People who do what Damon did are skilled at making their targets feel responsible for being targeted. That is part of the mechanism. You are not foolish. You were deceived by someone who had practiced deceiving people for years. That is a different thing. I am 67 years old. I have my house, my garden in Johnsonville, my Thursday lunches with Bernard, my Sunday calls with Claire. I have what I worked for. I have what I nearly lost. That is enough. For now, that is more than enough. If any part of this story felt familiar, please talk to someone today. Not tomorrow. Today. In New Zealand, you can reach Citizens Advice Bureau for free legal guidance, or contact the Retirement Commissioner's Office for financial protection advice. Your instincts deserve to be heard.